Hello again and welcome to another Mr. M video. Sorry I'm taking so long to post these things. I've been very busy with other projects and other life things, but I want you to know I am still out there. I'm still making videos. I'm still building custom subs, and I will hopefully be posting more videos in the upcoming in 2025. For this specific video, as you may have guessed, I will be converting two 12-inch ZV6 Sundown ZV6 or ZV6, whatever subs, into 18-inch Sundown ZV6 subs with a couple of little GSA Industries tweaks to, in my opinion, make them better. And you can have your opinion and think whatever you like. You're more than welcome to. I don't care. So I'm gonna do things my way as always. Yeah, thanks for I don't even know what I'm going here. I'm tired. Let's check this video out. So in order to convert this particular subwoofer ZV6 12 into a ZV6 18, all we really need from this particular sub is the motor and the terminals. As you can see, I've already loosened them. So what we're going to do first is take the rubber gasket off, remove the cone assembly. Yeah, let's get started with that. So in this particular case, and I imagine most don't bother going to the trouble because it probably isn't really worth it, I did actually separate the surround from the basket. It's a complete pain in the butt because this seems like an epoxy that was used here, or a CA. It's a rigid glue rather than a rubber glue. I know that people will say Sundown does it right and this is the glue you should use. I am a huge believer in the idea that there's more than one right way to do things. I personally use a rubber adhesive between the basket and the surround, but hey, people will probably tell me wrong, tell me I'm wrong. I don't really care. It works for me. I've never had any problems with this, so that's what I use, specifically either something like this, high strength black rubber adhesive, or alternatively I also use E6000 on many subs in the past, but for the Sundowns I'm going to use that black rubber adhesive. So then the next thing one would have to do is disconnect the terminal leads from the terminals. Obviously you can see I've already pulled this thing apart to speed up the process, and what I'm going to do now is put the camera onto a tripod while I pull this stuff out. Now this is another challenge, separating the spider from the basket, which you can obviously see I've already done here. I don't actually even remember how I did that. Looks like I went around and probably heated it with the heating gun, lifted it with a chisel. I like to use let's see which one, something like this, like a 1/2 inch wide, and just go from the outside. But like I say, heat, and actually I think I might have used a bit of acetone on this one as well. All the parts are metal. I mean, all the parts that are staying with the sub are metal, even though these aren't staying with the sub. It's a complicated situation in this one because this cone assembly is actually still functional. So I did my best to pull it out without damaging it. This glue situation is gonna be problematic because it kind of makes it look ugly. But anyway, whatever. Technically, this is a reusable 12-inch ZV6 cone assembly. Would anyone want to use it? Probably not, but I might. So we're going to hold on to that. And then the next thing we're going to do is unbolt the basket from the motor. Now the 12-inch has 6 40mm M6 bolts. Let's take a look at one of those. I think I've got them here somewhere. Huh. Unless I don't. Unless I don't. Oh, here we go. So these are not actually. Oh, there's one. Yeah. So this is the what are we here? M6 40mm bolt that comes out of the ZV6 12. Now that's one of the things that we ran into here, is that the 12-inch basket has 6 bolts, and if we look over at the, well, this is a spacer, it's not the basket, but the 18-inch spacer, as you can see, has 8. So if you were doing this conversion, you would need to pick up an additional 2 M6 40mm bolts so that you can attach the 18-inch basket to the ZV6 motor. The next thing I'm going to do actually though is probably take off the terminals, because I don't want to do that once the basket is separated from the motor. So basically you just unbolt this little guy here, and these pop right off. We can pop those right onto the 18-inch basket when we assemble it. You've got your Allen keys, your M4 Allen keys or M4 socket head Allen key bolts to put your terminals onto when you reassemble it with the 18. So we'll pull both of those off. Obviously, I've already done all of this stuff, so it's just kind of to quickly go through it so that everything comes apart and is shown in the order. Now I'm going to pause this for a second, and we're going to turn the sound off so that we can run the drill without blowing up your speakers. Okay, so we got our 2 40mm bolts out of there. This will pop right off. This spacer ring pops right off. Now we have a 12-inch ZV, well, it's not a ZV6 basket, it's a 12-inch Sundown basket, same as every other Sundown basket, except for the other models, I guess, some different models, but they're basically any competition level Sundown's going to have that same basket. That's fine. So we'll probably give this a wipe with some acetone. It's actually very clean. There's no weird spots or anything that I'm overly concerned about, but why not give it a quick wipe while the whole thing is apart, and then we will throw the 18-inch basket on there. So I've given this a quick wipe with the acetone. There's a little bit of adhesive here, nothing that I'm overly concerned with. So then we're going to throw our spacer for the 18-inch basket, line the holes up, probably not critical. beforehand, so you can just line them up once the basket's there. It's not like it's particularly heavy or hard to move. Now what I've done is I've already put all the bolts in there. Probably gonna regret this, but that's okay. We'll see. That's interesting. Get a couple of those in there. And once again, I'm just going to pause this and turn the sound off. And that is it for mounting the basket, or converting the basket and motor assembly from the 12 to the 18. Once you get the cone out, you just undo the bolts and pull the 12-inch basket off. Then swap for the 18-inch spacer as well as the 18-inch basket. The next thing we're going to do is mount the cone assembly onto the spider spacer. So that's kind of a little bit more challenging because you not only need to center the cone, because the spacer has, if you're lazy and you're not using a mechanical fastening to attach the spiders down to the basket, which most people aren't, because I often hear people say things like, you only need to do that if you're using cheap Chinese glue, or whatever other statements people make about why you don't need to mechanically fasten your spider to the basket. If it's glued properly, it's not necessary. While that is true, if you add a mechanical fastener to it, it will always make it stronger. So if you glue it properly and use a mechanical fastener, it's going to be stronger than if you just glue it properly. Whether you're using cheap Chinese glue or United States manufactured glue, it doesn't really matter. If it's glued properly and it's mechanically fastened, you're going to have a better product regardless. That's actually why one of the 12 I just rebuilt failed, was because the spider separated from the basket straight from the manufacturer. Now I'm going to assume that the manufacturer glued it properly. That being said, we've made a clamp ring, or I've made a clamp ring, and we're going to put M4 bolts through the spider, through the clamp ring, through the spider, through the spacer, pull it to the basket. So now why that makes things more difficult is the 4M bolts are significantly smaller than the 6mm holes that are in the spider spacer. So the spider spacer can wiggle around a little bit. So what we want to ensure is that when we put the spider spacer onto the basket, that each hole is directly centered over the 4M fastening points that are on the basket. So we'll take a look at that. So as I mentioned, these are your 4M fastening points on the basket. And this is your spider spacer. Those are roughly 6 millimeters. So when you put your, where are we here, your 4M screws in there, if I can find them, then you see that there is a lot of play. No, well, these are 4M, but they're not the ones we're using for this. So we'll just pull one of these out. You can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's your mounting hole, and there's your screw. So that allows you to adjust the position while you're bolting it down, so you're not fixed exactly where the bolt holes are. That could be fine. I like to have a little bit of adjustability anyway. So as you see, this kind of wiggles around a bit. That way you can make sure that you're perfectly centered on the pole bent. So what we want is for these holes in the spacer, here, etc., to be perfectly centered on the fastening points in the basket. Now, the way that I've accomplished that, in case you're wondering, just hang this here for a second, is by using a 4M4 bolt with no head on it. I used a lathe, rounded it. So if theoretically we put these into the fastening points directly opposite to each other. So now we've got the two M4 bolts with the rounded tops sitting in the fastening points. Then we take the spacer, we fit it over those like that. So it is centered on the two holes opposite each other. Maybe if I was really an overachiever, I would put those rounded head bolts in every hole. But we can take a look and see that. I don't actually know if I'll be able to see this, but all the holes are centered. So I'm happy with that. So it just gives you a bit of adjustability once you put those bolts through the spider. So the next thing we want to do is glue the spider down to this. Once it's glued onto this, and it's obviously centered, we're going to, so we'll center it, glue it, and then we will punch out these holes. And then once those holes are in place, we can glue the clamping ring on top of that, so that it's basically like a fancy washer on top of the spider to bolt it down. Because if you just bolted the spider, the Nomex could rip around the bolts if it came separated. Again, if you glue it properly, it's not going to come off. But I like to make sure everything is extra secure. Maybe it is a waste of time in many people's opinions, or maybe unnecessary. But when I build subs, that's how I do it. And that's how we're going to do it here. That way we know that no matter how many watts you're putting on this thing, that spider is never going to separate from that basket. And nor should it. And like many will say, if it's glued properly, it's not going to separate. But don't waste your breath. I've heard it a million times. So thank you for that. Anyway, so like I say, the next thing we're going to do is get some shims, put the cone assembly in, center the cone assembly, and then glue it to the spacer ring. The spider is now glued to the spider spacer. So we're going to remove these clamps that we're just holding additional pressure on, so we got a nice flat contact between the spider and the spider spacer. I also use the clamp rings just to, because putting the clamps on just directly onto the spider won't work, because there's a ridge around the spacer. There's actually a little bit of glue squeezed out in the clamp ring, which is a multi-piece assembly that goes on. Is a little bit glued, but not terribly. It's good. So you know you put enough glue on, squeezing out, and that's great. Now we can pull this guy out. It should be nice and snug because the shims are very. Pull the shims out too. Oh, it's not gonna come out like that. Hold on a second. Okay, there we go. So I accidentally put a little bit too much glue in around one of the locations, and it went into the hole in the spacer, or over here, into the hole in the spacer, and got stuck to the centering bolts that I put in there. Not a big deal. Got it off, no problem. So now we have our spider ring nicely attached to the bottom of the spider. So the next thing we're going to have to do is, as you can see, we've got holes on the bottom of the spacer ring here, and no hole. Oh, this is very hard to get the camera in here on top of the spider. So I'm gonna have to drill those holes out so that the bolts can go through there, and it can, so it has that little bit of wiggle to adjust and center. Now I was thinking about it, looking at the basket, and there's also 4M bolts in the basket itself, where the surround is mounted. So it does provide the opportunity to have a completely removable cone assembly that isn't glued to the basket at all, rather than simply using the mounting hardware to reinforce. You could exclusively use mechanical fasteners to hold the whole cone assembly in, so that in a competition setting or whatnot, if you had spare cone assemblies sitting around, you could pull the blown cone assembly out and bolt a new cone assembly in. Anyway, that's definitely one reason to have bolts up here as well. You need a rigid ring, likely made out of steel, and I believe that Sundown actually makes those. And so my guess would be, or at least the way I would use that, would be to have removable cone assemblies, but everybody has their own approach to things. And as I've said before, I believe there are more than one right way to do things. The last thing I did after I glued the spider itself to the spider spacer was I assembled the clamp ring. I don't know if you can see that in here. Because I had to make it in multiple pieces, I glued it together, clamped everything in place, and then now I'm going to unbolt it so that I can put the terminal lugs onto the tinsel leads, or the, tinsel leads here, and put some shrink tube on that. And then once that's done, I can actually glue the cone assembly into place, bolt it to the frame, and also glue the surround in place. I'm not sure why these surrounds don't sit flat. They got these weird, like, I don't know if you can see that on here. Let's just move the camera up a little bit. Zoom in. It's not flat. Like, you want this to sit flat on the basket, but they're gonna have to be clamped in place. It's all got this weird angle. Anyway, neither here nor there. We'll glue it flat and it won't matter, but it is kind of odd that it's like that. Say la vie. Life goes on, right? Our shims will hold everything straight while we're gluing it, so it won't really matter. So anyway, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unbolt the clamp ring from the basket and the spider spacer from the basket, put the lugs on to the tinsel leads, and then we will glue everything together. Now that we've got the cone assembly out of the basket and the clamp ring, whatever, we're gonna put some lugs on these and some shrink tube, just because when we put the clamp ring on, the bolt holes here line up with these, so just in case we don't have any shorting through the basket between the leads, we're going to put shrink tube over everything so that it's insulated from the mounting hardware for the let me see those beautiful GSA clamp rings, so sexy. We're just moving on to the last stage of this drop-in, I guess you can call it. I got the GSA mechanical clamp ring on there. Even though there's a seam, it is one piece. It's all been glued together, and there'll be lots of bolts holding it in place. Everything's now glued and clamped. The spider's clamped in place with the bolts in the spider clamp ring thingy, and I've also connected the leads while I was waiting for it to just for something to kill time while the glue's curing. This is a 24-hour cure, so I won't be able to pull clamps off until tomorrow evening. And I still need to glue the dust cap on, so that means it's going to put me, and then the dust cap's going to need 24 hours to cure as well. So we're looking at another day at least, but now we wait. So here we go, about to wrap things up on this sub. It's been sitting for 24 hours. I did already remove a couple clamps just because they weren't matching these ones. But see, like that, because I didn't have quite enough to get all the way around the 18-inch. But we are about to drop this cap on. One of the things I noticed, not mentioning any names, but it was provided to me by another sub builder, and the flange angle does not match the cone angle. This looks like it's a 45 degree. These are closer to 60, I would say. So anyway, what that means is that the dust cap does not sit, like the flange doesn't sit flush on the cone. So you're only really gluing this outside edge to the cone itself. The wide flange could have a slightly steeper angle on it if it was the proper cone for this, or sorry, the proper dust cap for this cone. If you look at this one, you got closer to a 60 degree. This is a Sundown one. So that's where you want your angle for these dust caps to be. But hey, everybody does their own thing. And again, there's more than one right way to do things. I wouldn't personally use these dust caps. I don't think they sit properly and they don't get enough contact area, so you're getting a weaker glue joint. But that's what I was given to put on this sub, and I can't buy soft parts for them. So here's what we're going to use. And that will be done. Anyway, one other thing. I've got all these screws here. You're probably wondering, why are all these screws on your magnet? Just in case I need to ship this thing. I built a small crate inside the box so I can drop the sub in here and screw the basket to these top pieces of strapping. And then I will cut handles on the outside here or like here, so you can actually lift it from the, stick your hand into the handle and lift it from the wood frame, pick up the sub. You'll actually be essentially picking it up by the basket, but anyway, it's just, in my opinion, a better way to package a sub, because putting a 200 or 100-pound sub in a cardboard box isn't very intelligent, in my opinion, but neither here nor there. I'm questioned about my methods all the time. And that's a wrap. We have just glued the dust cap onto the sub. Clamp ring has been added. It is pretty sexy. GSA Industries, we the best. And yeah, that's the end of that. We're just gonna wait for that to cure, 24 hours. Pull the weights off. Build is done. Well, there you have it. Two 12-inch ZV6, Sundown ZV6 12s converted into ZV6 or ZV6, depending where in North America you are watching this from. 18-inch ZV6 subwoofers. I did a phenomenal job. I know, it's wonderful. Thanks for checking out this video, and stay beautiful.